Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Rich Seeley, who's the president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation in the Thunder Bay local.
Yeah, we are called District 6A Thunder Bay.
All right, District 6A.
There you go.
All right, so welcome to the show, Rich.
Thanks, Steve.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, or did you grow up in Thunder Bay? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm a Thunder Bay boy, born and educated here. I went to Westgate High School, where my father was a teacher for 35 years.
I should have been wearing my Westgate hat. Oh my gosh.
And the funny thing is, I left the city after I got my degree. I had to find work elsewhere. And in 1998, I got back here at Westgate.
So you went to Lakehead to get your education?
I went to Lakehead to do my English degree and then an education degree. I became an English teacher and went around the province, and then I returned home as soon as the jobs were here.
Well, we're glad you're back home.
Thanks.
So how many years were you a teacher?
This is my 27th year in the profession. I spent 24 in the classroom. This is my third year where I'm released from the classroom as a full-time bargaining unit president with OSSTF.
So tell me a little bit about OSSTF. That's the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation.
Right. And it's a little bit misleading, the name, because we don't just represent teachers. Across the province, we represent people in almost any job class that exists in the education sector. So we represent locally teachers and occasional teachers, and of course I represent them personally. We also represent student support professionals, early childhood educators as well, in both the public and the separate boards. Across the province, we've got people in every job class you can imagine. We have child and youth workers, we have custodians in some places, we have school bus drivers in some locations. So we even represent several different university support staff organizations at Brock, Wilfrid Laurier, Guelph. So if you're in education, you could be a part of OSSTF. So we're a 60,000 strong member organization. And again, we do much more than just what you typically think about unions. You know, unions, yes, we bargain contracts, protect our members, and we do those things, and we do them vigorously. But we also have an educational services department where we write curriculum, deliver workshops to other educators across the province. Sometimes the boards will invite our educational services people in to deliver certain workshops, like a classroom management workshop, for example, is a very popular one. Yeah, it's a multifaceted organization. Of course, we also have a political action branch as well, as you can well imagine, and it's pretty active these days. But we've got a lot of things going on with OSSTF, and we're very proud of the different things that we do, all of it in defense of public education.
So just locally here in Thunder Bay,
Yep.
you know, we've heard in the news recently that CUPE represents a number of members and they just settled a contract. Now, how does that work out in Thunder Bay? Are there members of CUPE that they could be either CUPE or OSSTF or other unions? Like
Yeah, for example, in Thunder Bay, CUPE represents in the public board the custodial and maintenance staff. I don't believe they represent anybody in the separate board in the city. So, you know, we were kind of worried there that, well, the board was worried that CUPE was going to be on a full strike there last week, but they settled that contract. In the public board, our secretarial staff represented by COPE, the office professionals, and I mean, those are the kind of the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head locally. But certainly I know that Unifor has its hands in other boards, in certain job classes, in other places in the province, not here. But yeah, lots of union interplay going on.
And so is that just kind of historic that's where they developed, or you know, is there discussion even that there might be value in kind of being together under one umbrella, or?
I haven't been part of any discussion along those lines. A lot of this, you know, is so historical, it predates me by decades, I'm sure. Are there discussions? Yeah, I mean, different organizations try to organize different groups of workers at different times if they're unorganized. There's no poaching that goes on if you're going down that road. I mean, we don't look at the custodians and say, oh, we want to get them here locally. We have a good relationship, I think, with our fellow unions, at least in Thunder Bay, I know we do, and we work together in harmony to try and promote, again, what's best for kids in our schools.
And you mentioned that sometimes there's a department of OSSTF that develops curriculum and does workshops.
Yep.
Now, is that for your members over and above what they get from the Lakehead School Board, or and
Sometimes it's in concert, but yes, it is something that we offer extra training that boards may not offer. Last year, for example, we approached our board and offered the idea that, listen, in March, we had a PD day last year, and we said, listen, would you like us to take that on? And we gave them a menu of these are the different workshops that OSSTF has, and the board has their own kind of needs they need filled. So they looked at that menu and said, well, these are some things that we would match with our goals for the year. So they let us kind of do a half-day workshop with our teachers. We ran that, but our support staff were able to get a full day workshop delivered by the union. So they were able to pick, from 3 options to say, we're going to offer these 3 workshops. Which ones do you want to do? We had those set up in different schools all around the city. It was quite a logistical challenge to get that going, because we're bringing people up from Southern Ontario to do some of the presentations, because our presenters come from all over the province. It depends on their area of specialty. And it ended up working out quite well.
So I'm getting the impression, in a way, that your union, the OSSTF, seems to work well with the Board of Education here.
I think we have a good relationship with our board. Not all employers and unions have great relationships. I know in other districts, OSSTF and other boards don't have a great relationship. And there have been times when it's been a little rocky around here, but I think for the most part, we understand each other and respect each other and try to work well with each other, because we do share the same goals. Ultimately, my members are teachers, and they want to be in the classroom teaching. And the board wants students to be educated the best possible way. My members want to be doing the best job they can. So we find a way to make that work.
And so in terms of building that relationship, what do you attribute that good relationship to? Like you said, maybe it's better here than in some other areas. What would make it better? Why is it better?
Well, I think to start with, because we're in a small community, relatively speaking. I mean, the Lakehead schools only serve kind of the city of Thunder Bay, a little bit in the outlying areas. And, because it's a small community, I mean, 1 degree of separation in Thunder Bay is, the saying, right? So, if those are superintendents and human resources people that I work with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, they could be my neighbors, they could be people I see in the grocery store. We have to get along. And even through difficult times, which are probably on the horizon here, at the end of it all, we still have to work together in the best interest of students and the public education system. So when you put your personal differences perhaps aside and philosophies aside, we're all just trying to do a job, and that is to make the education system work to the best possible way it can.
Well, I salute you, Rich, because to me, I think that is the way of the future. Like, how can we represent our interests of the folks we represent, teachers for you or the staff, but at the same time work together with the administrators, the managers to make it work for the students.
Yeah,
really.
and it's not always going to be smooth sailing, and there's times when you're not going to agree on things, but there's processes in place to problem solve and resolve differences. And I think that I and my counterparts at the school board, we all understand that we're doing a job, and there are parts of that process that have to get done, and we respect that process because we both agreed on what that process has to look like. It's in our collective agreement, and as long as we stick to those rules, I find things work out. Even if we don't agree on things, we agree on the process and finding a way through things. And generally, we solve problems fairly effectively around here.
Well, that's great. Please stay tuned. We have to take a short break, but we're going to find out what's on the horizon. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Rich Seeley, who is the president of the OSSTF, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, with the local here in Thunder Bay, 6A.
6A.
District 6A.
District 6A.
Oh my gosh. So, Rich, we're talking about how really you've been working fairly well together with the school board and the other partners around education, but there's some clouds on the horizon. We've all heard that there's cuts in education on the provincial level. What is your union, what is your position? How are you handling this stuff, and where are you going?
Well, it's a multifaceted issue that we're talking about, but ultimately, OSSF is a proud defender of public education, and our view right now is that the Doug Ford government seems to be out to do some harm to the public education system. I mean, last March, as our contract was coming towards an end, it expired in August this year, they wanted to get it to the bargaining table. Before we even got there, they announced that they were going to be changing the formula by which they generated, school boards could generate teaching positions. And so ultimately, the bottom line is that over 4 years, we would be looking at about a 10,000 teacher reduction across the province in all levels of teaching, which is about 1 in 4 teachers. That's a major problem in our view. I mean, obviously, we're a union and we want to protect our members. But when you start taking 10,000 caring adults, never mind the support staff, people who are going to be hit as well, take those 10,000 plus caring adults out of schools that are going to have the same number of students in them. Across Ontario, enrollment is growing, and in Thunder Bay, it's stable in our high schools, because I can talk about high schools intelligently, not so much elementary schools. We see that taking those adults out are going to increase class sizes. It's going to remove supports for students who are at risk, and there's more and more students at risk every day. In Thunder Bay, we have certainly a high number of at-risk students. So we're very concerned that this approach that they're taking to taking teachers out of classrooms, students are going to lose opportunities for getting certain kinds of classes, certain kinds of credits. They're going to be in more and more unsafe conditions in the schools because there's going to be less supervision in those schools. And schools are going to be generally far less pleasant places to be. I mean, we think that the system is working quite well. Ontario is recognized worldwide as being one of the top 5 education systems in the world. So why on earth would the government want to work to dismantle it? And they say we have to save money. We see things a little bit differently. So now, we're at the bargaining table finally. We started bargaining last month with the government, and we would like to talk about class sizes and staffing generation. But they're not willing to talk about those things just yet. So we're a bit frustrated at this point. We're going to be starting to take strike votes starting next week across the province as a way perhaps to let the government know that our members are serious and they value what they do. And we all believe that what's important is that schools operate as they have. I mean, yes, there's always room for efficiency and making some improvements. No one's against those kinds of things. But to take 10,000 teachers out of the system is not going to improve the system at all. And certainly, you were mentioning that your granddaughter, I believe, is new is it your daughter?
My daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law is new in the system. I mean, young in the system, it's going to be tough to find a job. So there's an economic impact as well.
Mm-hmm, indeed. So you were talking about the class size was an issue. Now we hear this in the media as well, and I know from my own experience, I experienced a big range of class sizes, and for a couple of years I was going to a school where it was just 12 kids and 1 teacher in the class. And to me, that was my best experience in education, including Ivy League university stuff. The ability to interact with each other and the teacher, to me, was key to my motivation to learn, to engage, to really gain those skills. Where are we at in terms of class sizes here in Ontario, and what does that future look like?
Well, if we don't manage to get some changes at the government level, it's going to be bleak. I mean, locally, our class size, this is both the separate and the public, because I talked to my colleagues in the separate board. Larger class size issue than we've seen. I mean, I know that some of my members are facing classes of 37, 38, 39. And depending on the level of that student, I mean, if that's a grade 9 locally developed students with very high needs, maybe they need to focus on literacy and numeracy. If there's 35 kids in that class, they're not getting that attention that they require. They're not getting that caring adult's time, that they would get in a smaller class. Like you said, you were in a class of 12. I mean, that's great. There's all kinds of research, Steve, that talks about the advantage of smaller class sizes, particularly in classes where there are at-risk students. I mean, the studies after study has shown that students who are fairly academically inclined and do well independently will probably flourish in almost any class size. Mm-hmm. But in Thunder Bay, we're finding more and more students aren't really necessarily coming from that background. They struggle, they come into our classes, larger class sizes, they get lost. They're going to fall through the cracks. Then when you add the government's interest in moving to 4 mandatory online credits for high school students, I mean, for us, that's a huge problem. Because, I mean, I taught an e-learning course the last 4 or 5 years I was in the classroom. And some students do exceptionally well at it, but very few. You have to do online learning very motivated, very self-directed, and students generally don't fall into that category. I mean, some do, and they're just fine, but most don't.
Well, I'm one of the ones that don't.
Yeah.
You tell me to do these online courses, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
I can do them if I have to, but I'm certainly not going to jump into it because it just doesn't work for me. That medium, I want to, it's the talking piece for me that makes my mind work.
Yeah. My daughter's in her 4th year at Lakehead University right now, and she has to take an online course. She's taking one right now, and she doesn't like it. I mean, she'll do it, and she's fine. She's pretty academically motivated, and she can take care of herself. But she prefers having a professor in front of the classroom that she can talk to and ask questions to and interact with. And I think that most students are like that. They want to be social. They want to be with their friends, but they do need that adult to have that kind of, there's the role model piece, there's interaction, there's a safety piece. I mean, there are students, any teacher will tell you they've had 4 or 5 students over their career who will kind of hang out around their classroom because they've formed some kind of a bond with them and they trust that individual as a teacher, and your classroom becomes a safe place. You move to online, I mean, there's no safe place there. It just becomes factory-like.
So you're involved in negotiations now with the government.
Yep.
So you've got all kinds of issues, your wages and benefits, but you're also negotiating around class size.
Yes.
So which one do you give on, and how does that work?
Well, I mean, the party line is we don't give on any of it. But I mean, that's not how bargaining works.
No,
I mean,
that's your starting place.
Yeah, we've taken an unprecedented step this year. We've put our initial positions out into the world. We have our own website called bargainingforeducation.ca, and anyone can go on there and see what our initial proposals to the government were. I mean, we're talking about nothing more than a cost of living increase and embed that in contracts forever. Because over the last 30 years, we've realized that generally through times of drought, we get 0% increases. Then in times of feast, we might get 2 or 3%. It's averaged out to be about the cost of living over the last 30 years. So why not make that the rule? We've included a position where we'd like to strike a tripartite committee to look at online learning, union, government, school boards. But before we move in that direction, let's talk about it.
We have to take a short break again, Rich. Please stay with us, and we'll be right back to find out more about our kids' education. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Rich Seeley, who is the local president of the OSSTF here in Thunder Bay. So Rich, we're talking about contract negotiations and class sizes, and what do you see as the local impact it might have here?
Well, the local impact of if the cuts go through is what I'm worried about. Last year, our federation commissioned the Conference Board of Canada to develop a report called The Economic Case for Investing in Education. And what it found, one of the key findings was that for every dollar you invest in education, the economy will reap $1.30 return. Conversely, for every dollar you pull out, the economy will lose $1.30. So you think about Thunder Bay, and I sat in the summertime with the Chamber of Commerce. I sent them their report, and they were kind enough to have a chat with me. And in Thunder Bay, you think about if I'm a small business owner and I have an uneducated workforce, because that's what we're worried about. I mean, ultimately, OSSTF is worried that the students who may not even graduate because of what's going to happen are going to enter the workforce ill-equipped to be effective employees. So I'm a business owner. I'm going to see a lot of people coming through my business who I can't really train them that well. I'm going to be going through a lot of people. That's going to cost me. That's going to reduce my productivity. The report also talks about lower education, higher crime. So that becomes now a drain on society. So those are two areas that are highlighted in the report. So when you think about Thunder Bay, you want to have people with well-paying jobs. You want them in jobs. You want to reduce crime. You want them to be able to contribute to the economy. If they're not working, or they're working low-paying jobs, or they're in jail, or part of the justice system, they're not going to be adding to the local economy. And the spinoff becomes businesses start to suffer, they start to close down or pare back their employment levels, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes a snowball. So, I mean, I've always viewed personally education and healthcare as the two biggest and most important pillars of society. Healthcare has to take care of the people who are unwell. Education allows us to try and live a life optimally. I mean, if you're more educated, research shows that you tend to live a healthier lifestyle. And that's better for everything. It's going to cut costs in healthcare down the road. It's going to cut costs in justice down the road. So we've been saying for the last 6 months to the government, listen, please look at our report. Please consider our positions, because by pulling money out, yeah, you're saving money in the short term, but you're going to cost us a lot more in the long term. A well-educated society is a cheaper society.
And you kind of pointed out earlier, with the larger class sizes, those folks that already have an advantage because of their DNA or whatever it is, where they're going to do well in any setting, do well. But there are groups in society that aren't served so well in that way. And so that's the group kind of that gets left behind, potentially anyways. You know, I'm just kind of going, okay, you're trying to bargain, and in a way the government is only interested in the pot of money really for teachers and education.
Yeah.
So the people that you're bargaining with aren't responsible for the revenue side or the other side, and so, you know, you're only bargaining half the equation.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, locally here, if we're bargaining with our school board, yeah, I mean, that's not kind of their thing. But we are bargaining with the government. I mean, the people across the table, you know, in Toronto, when we're down there, are the people who have access to the purse strings.
Okay.
They do have the power to make what we would consider to be the right decisions for public education. And public education closes that gap you were talking about, the people who, the haves and, you know, the have-nots, the less fortunate. I mean, public education closes that gap. I mean, our overarching concern really is that by gutting the public system, it opens up the door to private education, which, if you can afford it, great. But if you can't, then your kids are kind of stuck with what's going to be a hollowed-out shell of an education system. And we see that in the United States. You know, if you can afford a private education, you're going to have a much better life than people who can't. We don't want that to come to Ontario. And I think that most Ontarians don't want to see that. We believe that. And so we've been really getting our message out that, yes, we want to get a little bit more money for our members, but mostly what we're after is protecting the system. Yes, we're protecting jobs, but people working in education contribute to the economy too. So everything that we're trying to do, we really believe is helpful for the community, helpful for the province.
So how can ordinary citizens or parents who support public education, how can they help to address these challenges we're seeing in the classroom?
Yeah, they can start by contacting their local MPPs, Michael Gravel in the north and Judith Monteith-Farrell in the south. I mean, they're supportive of our position because both the Liberals and the NDP tended to be fairly supportive of public education in the past. Unfortunately, we don't have a PC MPP here, but certainly they can bring those concerns to the legislature where the government can hear those things. They can write to the Premier. They can write to the Minister of Education. Email is easy to find. I mean, let their voices be heard. I mean, that's a start.
And if your contract negotiations don't go well, what would that look like?
Well, it could look like almost anything. I mean, it could be a withdrawal of certain select services that teachers provide. For example, you know, if we get a strike mandate for members, once we have the votes and we get to a point where, you know, our provincial leadership decides it's time to take action, it could look like, okay, maybe, you know, teachers aren't going to attend after-school parent conferences or after-school staff meetings. anything from that right on to a full-blown walkout is certainly on the table. I'm not saying we're going there. We don't know where we're going to go.
Right.
We don't have plans as far as that goes, but everything could be on the table. I mean, CUPE was ready to walk, and they got a deal, 12 hours to spare. So it could be the same thing for us down the road. You never know.
So in the last minute or so that we've got left, is there one key piece that you think needs to be told?
I think that people need to realize that public education is under attack in Ontario, and they need to be aware of its impact on our community. It's not just, people like to portray teachers as a bunch of greedy people who don't work very much. We get the summers off and all that. That's not what my members are. My members are hardworking people, just like their neighbors, who want to make a living, but they want to make a difference in their community as well. And all we want are the opportunities to do that to our best possible ability. And by having well-funded classrooms with proper supports for students, then we can do that.
Rich, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Sure appreciate it. And thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for future shows.